Some new calls for the Pentagon to end gun-free zones at military installations. That policy leaving highly trained Marines in Chattanooga completely defenseless. My next guest calling our servicemen and women sitting ducks. Pete Hegseth is CEO of Concerned Veterans for America, a Fox News contributor. Pete, it's good to see you. First of all, for 23 years, military personnel here in the United States have not been able to arm themselves, defend themselves. What is the rationale behind that?
Well, multiple rationales. You've got this kind of threat didn't exist for a very long time, so it didn't seem necessary to have sort of armed forces with unarmed at this point, but here on home soil, because there wasn't that domestic threat. Second, posse comitatus and the perception of a militarization of or a policing of our military is something that folks have always been sensitive about. But you've also got a very safety-conscious military culture that likes the idea of the sort of military cocoon in the base where everyone is secure, weapons are in the arms room, and no one is carrying personally. Accountability is important, and I think those three things, and really a safety-conscious military culture. It's ironic because these are guys trained to be warriors, but we coddle them in many ways here at home, has led to this. And there's no one really to blame. It's almost the momentum of things, which we clearly have to undo in light of the threats we face today.
Well, but it's been happening over and over again, and yet that policy of a gun-free zone has not changed. And I'm not just making this up. It was, recruiting center in Little Rock, the Navy Yard in Washington, the Fort Hood massacre. I put together a list, and I've mentioned this twice already, but it's worth repeating. In the last 19 years, 21 U.S. military facilities, some of them recruitment centers like yesterday, have been attacked. And the people there, military personnel, were not allowed to defend themselves. Invariably, they were murdered because of it. So, I mean, isn't this a no-brainer, and it should have been changed a long time ago?
Yeah, I mean, Fort Dix is another one. It should have been changed a long time ago. The Pentagon brass, though, don't want it. There also has been, I think, for a long time, just a willful blindness to the reality that radical Islamists are coming for us here at home, that they're making our service members a direct target. And the other ones, you mentioned it, there's a long litany, but sometimes it takes the most horrific of examples to demonstrate how disarmed our military really is, that they do not have afforded Second Amendment protections when in uniform. This policy will have to change. Thankfully, Duncan Hunter, he's a congressman from California, a Marine himself, Iraq and Afghanistan vet, is in today legislation in the House that would allow recruiters to be armed. If not all of them, at least a designated individual, whoever's in charge of that location, to be armed. But I think it goes further than that. We have stripped that Second Amendment right from service members in uniform, and especially if they're off base, but even on, we've got to look at this policy and realize we're just in a different world, and if we don't trust these guys to carry, then who do we trust to carry?
Absolutely. We're at war, and repeatedly we receive threats and warnings. Indeed, about a month ago, ISIS issued an order to its supporters, carry out attacks during Ramadan, which, by the way, ends this weekend. And yet, the military is now saying today that they didn't increase security. And clearly, the military is a known target. Did the Pentagon make a mistake there?
Pentagon has made a mistake there. Pentagon is also taking its cues from a White House that refuses to call this enemy an Islamic terrorist enemy. And as a result, you paper over that reality. You talk about extremism on the left and the right and the ideological spectrum, as opposed to targeting what it is, where it's coming from, and arming people to deal with it. What did I do when I learned more and more about the ISIS threats? I went out and bought a couple of guns. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have one, you got nothing. You're scrambling behind a desk. The reality is America has always been premised on the ability and opportunity for Americans to defend themselves. And right now we have unarmed services or armed forces. We need to be willing to arm them. Obviously, safety precautions need to be there. I was a platoon leader in a rifle platoon. You do introduce new variables and complexities if you've got young guys with their own personal firearms in addition to what they're issued with the unit. No doubt there are complications that would have to be worked out. But even in that environment, you have to be willing to step back and say we are at war with an enemy hunting and threats against military targets and military members. If they're not armed, they're in serious trouble.
Pete Hegseth, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You got it.